All in Sports Network. We love sports.
It is Wednesday, November 13th, and this is your daily fix for all things Texas Longhorns right here on All In Horns. I'm Tanner Carlson along with Jake Jimerson, brought to you by Rogue Sports Network. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, and rate the show. Leave a comment and interact with the conversations that we have. We will definitely interact with you. We appreciate everybody who has already, commented on the show and been a part of this. We release these episodes Tuesday through Friday at noon each and every single day. And then Saturday, we let football dictate our schedule, and we will release an immediate reaction episode following Saturday's game as the Texas Longhorns take on the Arkansas Razorbacks in Fayetteville. Jake, any update on whether or not you're going to be able to make that game?
Yeah, if I go, it'll essentially be
Saturday. You teased it Saturday.
Yeah, if I go, it's going to be alone. That's kind of the thing that's happened. My wife has to go out of town, and so I got to figure out if I could get back in time where the dog won't be alone or get someone to watch it. So I'm still kind of sorting it out. I want to go, but at the same time, the logistics might not line up like I was hoping they would. It's just not something my wife can get out of. So
yeah, I would have
still working it out. I'll have a for sure answer later this week.
I would have flirted with the idea of tagging along with you on a spontaneous trip. However, I've already got 2 future tickets purchased down the road and with the girls and the whole family and stuff. So, I'm out of pocket on this one, buddy. Sorry, you're on your own. You're riding solo.
Yeah, I thought about asking you, but then I remembered you had said that, and I was like, probably a little bit further of a drive for you two. It's an 11 a.m. kickoff, so the travel logistics are easier for me. But luckily, tickets don't cost an arm and leg for this one. They're not quite as expensive as like an A&M game or any of the games that have been in Austin this year. So still sorting it out, figuring out if I want to go brave it alone and not have my wife to kind of tame me from doing anything too stupid. Cause I'm sure that stadium, even though it's an 11 a.m. kickoff, it's going to be rowdy.
Every time we've gone to a game together, Jake, you've gotten into it with somebody every single time. Whether that be March Madness, you got into it with some Miami fans after the game. Nothing physical. It's never been anything physical. It's just always jawing at
I forgot about that. I forgot about the Miami fans.
Yeah.
The Oklahoma State one is the one that always sticks out.
Oklahoma State one, Jake, you got to tell that real quick before we get into this thing.
Oh man, the thing was, I just want to say this first off. All the other reasonable Oklahoma State fans in our section agreed with us, but we went to this game. We were in college. It was like sophomore, junior year. And we go to Texas, Oklahoma State. This is the Charlie Strong, Texas. Mm-hmm. This is the Texas that got every single extra point blocked or missed in that game.
It was in Stillwater.
And there was this one obnoxious Oklahoma State fan just a row in front of us that every time they'd miss a kick, the kick is no good. And just being obnoxious. And then they call a defenseless receiver penalty. Wasn't it against Texas? And he was catching the Oklahoma State receiver is like catching the ball, had the ball, gets hit, gets it knocked out. And this guy in front of us, he's been obnoxious the whole game. So it's been building for me. I'm in college. I've had a few drinks.
And Texas is playing terrible, by the way.
Yeah,
they're losing the game.
The Charlie. I figured that was obvious. It was the Charlie Strong era.
That was obvious.
And so this fan, it's been building. I've had some drinks in me, and I'm typically not the confrontational type. I kept my confrontation on the football field. When it comes to in person, I'll get into it on social media. But this guy had been building all game. He keeps saying defenseless receiver, and then I finally just unload on him of you Oklahoma inbred idiot, saying every word in the book that I could think of to insult Oklahoma. I can't say a lot of those words on this podcast and then explain to him why he was stupid. Right. And then he kept trying to argue back. And wasn't he trying to like count points or something?
He was
and
saying
he missed
defenseless receiver, and the ball had already been touched, and like it was a good play. And I can't even remember. I think it was like a fumble and Texas had recovered or something like that, and he wanted a defenseless receiver call because the defender had hit the receiver. It actually was just incomplete. I think they had to review it because it looked like a fumble, but defenseless receiver was never even an option, and he
Yeah,
was just screaming. He was just screaming defenseless receiver over and over and over again, and it was like a bang bang play, and it was a receiver getting hit by a defender down the field. Like defenseless receiver wasn't even an option.
It wasn't
So,
even targeting.
no. It was it was just a really dumb fan who didn't know football, and then you got into it, and then the Miami thing at the at March Madness. What was it? The Elite Eight was actually pretty funny as well. But it started with there was a Miami fan who was just naming the first names of the players every time they touched the ball. Jordan, do it, Jordan. No, it wasn't even a good voice. It was like a high pitch, like go Jordan, go Jordan.
It was like a cartoon character.
It was horrible.
I just remember we had went to the Xavier game the day before, and Texas rolled in that game, and we had set in the Texas section. So I got us tickets in the same section, thinking it would be the same. Turned out we were in the Miami section, which wasn't a big section. There was other Longhorn fans,
still
but
really cool because we were like 3 rows behind Rodney Terry and the team. So still a cool seating.
Yeah,
you know?
it was awesome, but it was more fun the Xavier game being in pure Longhorn country as opposed. But the funny thing, it wasn't even the guy screaming the first names that got into it. It was guys on like the second deck that were trying to talk smack, and I ended up just saying something along the lines of "I can't hear you from the cheap seats," or something along those lines.
Well, and then there were Miami fans on our way out. We were walking out, and your lovely wife was picking us up from the game because obviously we cannot drive after said game, and we were waiting for her to come pick us up, and they had said something about, I can't even remember how it got started, but I remember we were at a bus stop and it was raining on us, and you were just jawing at them back and forth, and I don't even know how it got started.
It had to do with the officiating. They tried to say something along the lines of the officials were trying to help Texas, even though Texas had about 6 times the amount of foul calls, especially down the stretch, as compared to Miami.
Because
and
Texas
I pulled
made it
up
a little
the box score while we were at the bus stop to prove them wrong.
I remember.
Because what they were saying was ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing to blame the game on the refs, and I wasn't even doing that, but it was like, if you're going to blame the refs for one side or the other in this game, it's pretty obvious which way that went. When my team loses, I do get a little salty, and I'll speak up a little bit more, especially if I just hearing something that's just wrong.
Yeah, you and I, we've been to
one of the few things I claim to know more than most people about.
You and I, we've been to a handful of games together. We went to a Cowboys Chiefs game together, and you were honestly just sad after that one because there was really, I mean, and Chiefs fans are pretty reasonable and knowledgeable over at least the last 5 years. They've been knowledgeable football fans. So, Jake, let's go ahead and finally get into this episode. Those were fun. That was fun trip down memory lane. Texas Longhorns are 13.5-point favorites over Arkansas on the road. You and I, we talked about this spread a little bit going into it. Like, I'm just glad it's not 21.5. I'm just glad it's not, some, crazy number that seems unreasonable. However, Texas has covered in a lot of those games. But 13.5, how you feel about it?
Yeah, I mean, I would probably put it at 11 or so, but that's because my PTSD, like we talked about last episode, from those last 2 Arkansas games is still there. I think, Texas really hasn't had many road tests this year. Obviously at Michigan definitely was one, but I feel like a road test is a little bit different whenever you're going up against a team that really hates your guts. And this is, if anything, I'm glad this game is happening because they're not just going to be going into College Station, not having played a road environment other than Michigan that's going to be hostile, because it's just a different level of hostile when a team and their fans truly hate your guts. Michigan doesn't hate Texas's guts. I mean, they're going to talk trash and put the horns down and all that, but it's a different level when you're going to Arkansas. And I can only imagine what College Station is going to be like. I mean, I imagine they're going to be pretty rowdy since it's like $1,000 to get into that game. Right. But I'm glad this game's happening because it's going to be good for them to play in this type of environment. But that 13.5 points, in all honesty, it's pretty fair. I think it's pretty reasonable to think Texas wins this game by 2 touchdowns. I don't think Texas has to play their best game. But at the same time, as we're going to get into, when Arkansas has played some of their best games this year, they have been a pretty competent and good football team. They can definitely provide, especially on the offensive side of the ball, a lot of explosive plays. They get a lot of yardage, and it's just whether or not they turn over the ball that really decides their fate. Whereas the defensive end has really been where they've been lacking, but they still won their biggest game of the biggest win of the season was against Tennessee, and it was because of their defense in that game, where they held Tennessee to 14 points. So we've seen Arkansas lose in multiple ways this year. We've also seen them win in multiple ways this year. So I don't think it's just going to be a cakewalk, but at the same time, I think a 2 touchdown favorite's pretty fair in this game.
Well, and one thing that I was wanting to look up, which I got on my phone, was the weather of that game, and if there was going to be possible chances of rain, or because we saw this last week on Saturday, Jake. A lot of games were affected by the weather. I think that Georgia Ole Miss game that was played in a dome, neutral site. I think Georgia wins that game, 9 times out of 10. I think the weather had an effect on it. I think the environment had the effect on it. I think Ole Miss playing with their backs against the wall had an effect on it. So there's a lot of factors that went into that game that caused Ole Miss to come out on the other side, beating and upsetting Georgia. But high of 66, partly cloudy, no rain chances, like a 7% chance of some precipitation. So yeah, it should be a fairly good game for the offense to be able to do whatever it is that they want to do in Fayetteville. And speaking of, Jake, let's go ahead and look at this by the numbers. We're going to take a deeper dive as to kind of what we can kind of get an idea as to what Sark and the coaching staff is scheming up, scheme wise, and what they want to do going into, and what they feel like their strengths are matched up against Arkansas's weaknesses through 11 games of the season. Jake, start us off with the how the offense matches up against Arkansas's defense.
Yeah, I mean, you look at this, you just kind of look at the raw numbers, and you immediately go to Texas probably going to look to pass the ball a lot, which they've looked to do in a lot of games this year. And quite frankly, that's just because in the SEC, you go against bigger fronts. You go against fronts that are going to be better at stopping the run as compared to, smaller defensive lines in the Big 12. And you see a lot of that in this game. Texas's offensive ranks are not that great when running the ball. Really the first time in the Sarkisian era where they're not top 25 in almost every rushing statistic.
Well, fun fact on Sarkisian with whether he's an offensive coordinator or a head coach, this will be the first regular season he doesn't have 1,000-yard rusher under his tutelage.
Yeah, and a lot of that is just because it started to become obvious that was going to be the case when you see a Baxter go down, and then you see a Clark go down, and then you see Blue and Wisner and Gibson all get banged up within the first few weeks of the season. Just naturally, you're not going to look to hand the ball off very much. We've seen them hand off the ball a lot when they felt like they needed to, or they felt like they needed to run clock. But other than that, this has been a pass first team. And luckily for Texas, I think the game plan looks like that's what it should be in this game. You look at Arkansas, I'm just going to list some of their rushing statistics here. Texas struggles in generating explosive plays in the run game. They only have 40 plays of 10 plus yard rushes this year. That's 85th in the country. Arkansas has only allowed 23 10 plus yard rush plays, which is second in the nation.
Yeah.
So I don't see Texas generating a lot of explosive run plays in this game. Arkansas is only giving up 3.6 yards per carry this year. That's 28th in the country. Texas averages right at about 4.7 yards per carry, which is 53rd in the country. They're actually pretty respectable in that category when you consider, especially early in the season, they had some really just bad games running the football.
I'll say this much about Texas. Sorry, not to cut you off, but I'll say this
good.
much about Texas's run game. I think even against Vanderbilt, again, we've mentioned against Vanderbilt, a lot of those big run plays on money downs, whether that be third down or second and long or whatever, got taken away by penalty. And that was the majority of their good rushes were negated by a holding penalty or what have you, or even a false start or something along those lines. And so I think Texas has the last 2 games between Vanderbilt and Florida has maybe ran the ball the best they've ran all season, aside from maybe the Michigan game.
Yeah, And the OU game. I definitely
Yeah.
think the OU game is still their best running performance. I mean, OU still has one of the best rushing defenses in the country, and Texas was popping big run after big run. If they do that in this game, I'm going to be really happy. But you flip it to the passing side, and I'm going to run it down for Arkansas's defense from, the average opponent passer rating is 116th in the country. The average opponent yards per pass is 115th in the country. Passing yards per game is 125th in the country. And opponent 20 plus yard pass plays, they are 74th in the country. Let's flip that to the other side. Texas's offense.
That's bottom half of the nation in every single category, just for those who are trying to keep up.
Yes. And on the flip side, you have Texas with the passer rating 9th in the country, between Quinn Ewers. And even though Quinn Ewers had a couple games he struggled, him and Arch combined, and both had very good seasons. Yards per pass, 14th in the country. Every Texas fan would have you believing that's not true. And then pass yards per game, they're 10th in the country. And then 20 plus yard pass plays. Again, Texas fans, you're going to be shocked to hear this. Number 3 in the country. With 49 20 plus yard pass plays.
That actually is shocking. That is shocking.
It is. It's surprising to me. And part of that is because you see just the constant negativity.
Well, that, and it's also, Jake, you and I, a topic of conversation we've had is Quinn struggling to throw the deep ball. Now, that doesn't always necessarily mean it's a deep pass. The 20-yard plays are coming off of screens, catch and runs, RPOs, what have you, and the receiver or the running back is making the yardage after the catch. I understand that as well, and I think a lot of fans don't put that together. Whenever they think deep passing, they think of a 50-yard bomb being completed.
No, and a lot of that is how teams have played Texas. There's something to Sarkisian saying, the defenses are playing us where they're not allowing a deep ball. And then Florida starts to drop down a safety to help against the run game, try to stop the quick passing game. And all of a sudden, Quinn's hitting deep shots down the field. There is something to that. And I think that's going to be open.
Caught.
Oh, yeah. Those that were caught. They're like we've talked about. They missed, despite being up 35-0 at halftime. That could have very easily have been 49-0 at halftime.
It could have
if they could just catch, if DeAndre Moore could have caught a couple of those deep balls, which I think he's going to catch the next one. Bold prediction. He's been as sure as they come all year long, and then he had 2 bad drops in one game, and now that's all anyone will remember. But the numbers just line up with the narrative that Texas is a pass first team. They are a much better passing team than they are a rushing team. And to be fair, they don't run. They're 84th in the country in rushes per game. So that kind of adds up with they're not running the ball much. When they've run the ball, they've had moderate success, I would say. But then when they pass the ball, whether that be quick passes that are an extension of the run game or hitting those intermediate throws, or more recently hitting throws down the field, they've had a lot of success. And I think that's going to be the key in this game. And I wouldn't be surprised to see an opening script that's similar to what we saw against Florida and Michigan, and some of these games where they come out and throwing the ball 10 out of the first 12 plays.
Jake, at the beginning of the season, knowing the running back situation with CJ Baxter and the injuries that have accumulated even before a single snap was had during the regular season for Texas going into this year, if I had told you Texas is averaging 164 yards a game with the offense between Quinn Ewers and the wide receivers and the passing game of what we expected that to be, but if I said I could guarantee you Texas through 12 weeks is going to be averaging about 165 yards per game, what would you have thought at that point in time? Would you say that's adequate? That's not bad.
Yeah, especially, since we had the knowledge of CJ Baxter going down so early, I think it's only fair to ask this question with knowing CJ Baxter's out and Christian Clark is out. I would have been happy with it. And I get it. I think we've just been a little bit spoiled with how good the run game has been under Sarkisian, and how good running games have been under Sarkisian his entire career. There's no coincidence that when they lose several running backs, and then they have all their capable running backs all be banged up throughout the season, that it's their worst season running the football. And this is a team that even if Baxter was healthy, we would have expected them to be a pass first team, or at least that was my expectation going into the season. Was this was going to be the first year where Texas looks to be a pass to set up the run team, and that's what we've seen. I think Sarkisian's ideal game is the Florida game. You get up by a bunch of points in the first half by throwing the football. You come out in the second half and you just bleed the clock. And you just, that's where you just try to have long possessions. You don't really care if you're scoring touchdowns every possession, and you just run out the clock and don't give them any chance to come back. It's like that Alabama style of football where you take them down quick and then you choke them out the rest of the game.
Yeah. And Jake, I also think, let's look at it. Let's zoom out even further within Sark's tenure. You got Bijan and Roschon being drafted in the same year, 2 years ago. Then you've got Keelan Robinson and you've got Jonathan Brooks getting drafted the very next season. So you've had 4 running backs drafted in the last 2 years. I don't know if you've got that talent. Well, you do have that talent. He's just was out for the season in a CJ Baxter. CJ Baxter will get drafted. Jaden Blue probably will get drafted, to be 100% honest with you. And so you're looking at within a 3-year span, you possibly could have had 6 running backs taken in a 3-year span. That just doesn't happen at every program. So the scheme is there. The player development is there. It just unfortunate Texas got bit by the injury bug at a certain position. And it seems as though they're making the best of what they've had, in my opinion, throughout the season, at least going into week 12. So what we're saying, so we can move on to the defense side of the ball, which will be very apparent who has the advantage in that situation. But Texas is going to have to pass the ball. They're going to have to set up the pass. A very similar game plan of what we saw with Florida. It's set up the pass to establish the run. And then if you are successful doing that, you can then maybe choke out the game and bleed it out using the running game and using some clock, slowing things down come second half of the third quarter going into the fourth.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll say on the offensive side of the ball, if there is one thing I think is a valid complaint against the running game this year, it's the lack of explosive run plays from the running backs specifically. Their explosive 10+ yard rushes are very low, and a lot of those have come from wide receivers. Which, to be fair, that's Sarkisian scheming it up. That's him realizing we don't have the same juice at running the football that we've had with Bijan and Roschon, and a lot of that's because even though Blue and Wisner missed some games, Blue's been banged up. You don't want to just run Gibson out there just as a true freshman nonstop. You saw that against Florida, where now he's having to carry a football around the 40 acres all day on, I believe it was Monday, because he had a couple fumbles in that game. But that would be the one area where I think there is some valid complaint, but I don't think it's anything to do with scheme. It's just more to do with the circumstances of the season.
Jake, if I told you going into this week that Arkansas is top 15 in 4 of the major overall offensive categories statistically in the country, would you have believed me?
I actually think yes.
Yeah.
Mainly because I've been as in tune with college football as I've ever been this year, and their offense has been really good. Ironically, their biggest win of the season was not because of the offense, but I watched that Oklahoma State game, and that definitely biases me because I just remember them having almost 700 yards of offense and finding a way to lose that football game. But they've outgained their opponents in several of their losses. They had about 400 yards of offense against A&M. They outgained them by almost 100 yards in that game. Obviously lost that in a close, and it's really just turnovers that slowed down this offense. They've put up a lot of yardage, it feels like, in just about every game I've watched them, and they have a lot of explosive play from the quarterback position, and they have some athletes that can beat you deep as well.
Well, Jake, they're number 5 in the country in explosive plays, which is a gain of 20+ yards. They have 60 of those on the season. Yards per game is at 483. That's good for 5th in the country. Yards per play at 6.8 yards per play. That's 11th in the country. And then third down conversion rate, Jake, that's a big one for me. I've always been very crucial on teams. The most success that you can have is extending drives on third down and making third down more convertible with short yardage and staying ahead of the chains. 47.7% of the time they're converting third downs. That's good for 13th in the entire country. And that's just one thing that stands out to me is that they play a similar style as kind of a Vanderbilt, if you ask me offensively. They're going to stay ahead of the chains. They're going to use the running game. They've got 2 bruising running backs and a good mobile quarterback in Taylon Green that can get you in third and favorable spots on third down to convert those, whether that be 3rd and 2, 3rd and 3, whatever. And you continue to move the chains. That also keeps your offense on the field, keeps the defense on the field, and then you start building time of possession. The biggest thing, stat line wise, with their win over Tennessee was they had 35 and a half minutes of possession to Tennessee's 24 and a half. They had over 10 minutes. They had 11 minutes essentially of playing time, more so than the Tennessee offense did, and it showed on the scoreboard.
Yeah, and to be fair, part of that was Tennessee just going 3 and out constantly
Sure.
in that game. They had no. I do not expect Texas's offense to struggle like Tennessee's did. But what also stands out to me is just they don't run the ball a ton, but yet they're 6th and 10 in explosive rush plays. So 10 plus yards on a rush. They're 6th in the country with 68 of those. Texas, on the flip side, is 8th in the country with allowing those, which, we've talked about them maybe looking like they struggle against the run at times this year. But at the end of the day, teams are only averaging 3.4 yards per rush against Texas. They've only had 25 rushes of 10 plus yards. I think a lot of those have come in garbage time.
Right. That's kind of where my point was going to go.
And then when you get to the passing defense, obviously Texas hasn't gone against exactly the most amount of competent passing teams. But regardless, they're number 1 in the nation in almost every metric. And other than an opponent's passes per game, which they're 47th in, which is not, you would think they would be bottom third of the country based off how many teams they've played that are run first, but they're actually not that. I mean, 47th isn't super high, but they're number 1 in opponent pass rating given up. They're number 1 in opponent yards per pass. They're number 1 in opponent pass yards per game, and they're number 1 in explosive pass plays given up. They've only given up 14 passes of 20 plus yards, which is pretty incredible when you consider, regardless of how good of a passing team they were going against just a year ago, that was the number 1 thing that they always gave up were big coverage bust type plays, and you just have not seen that as much this season.
And that's exactly where Arkansas makes their money, is on explosive plays. So I think Texas actually has a very good advantage in this game. And then that's something that I will probably lean more on is the defense's ability to stop their offense, because their offense is a boom or bust offense. Let's just call it what it is. It seems like it's either a touchdown or a turnover. It doesn't seem like they're punting very much, but they are putting up big yardage, and they're either getting down the field or they're turning the ball over. And they're also their red zone percentages are not that high either, so they're settling for field goals once they get into scoring territory. So I think Texas actually has one thing that I've noticed is whenever it's a high-powered offense versus a high-powered defense, and it's maybe more so in the NFL than it is college, but it feels like to me the defense typically wins that battle more times than not whenever you've got a number 1 offense playing against a number 1 defense. Typically the defense ends up on top because they're just more likely to make stops or cause trouble for an offense to lose a little bit of rhythm, whatever that might be.
Yeah. And it'll be interesting because I kind of first I have a point I want to make, then I have a question for you. The first point I want to make is, and I wanted to make this in yesterday's episode, but just forgot to, was there's a lot of talk after the Florida game of this defense does struggle against the run. And what I have found from rewatching the games, in my opinion, is teams can run the ball for 4 to 5 yards a pop when Texas just plays a vanilla-based defense where they don't put extra guys in the box. But when they have situationally needed to stop the run, or where they're in a position where it's like, okay, we can't let this team get a drive on us here. Teams have not had any success running the football against them in those situations, other than maybe Georgia for prolonged in the first half. In the second half, they really didn't. And so with situationally, when it comes down to it, they make adjustments and then they stop the run. But they're always going to try to come out and play you in a base defense and see, just like last year, see if they can stop the run playing the base defense. If they're struggling to do so, they make some adjustments and then they look to stop the run a little bit more. But if they can stop you in the base defense, you're not going to go anywhere the entire game on them.
Well, and backups are playing. Let's just be real. Like Texas is subbing guys out more frequently in the second half whenever they're up by 30 than they are keeping their starters in the rotation. And it's not just like, yes, I understand like sometimes you're going to have your starters playing mixed in with them, but they're rotating more regularly. And you're not really getting a feel for the offense whenever you're on a constant rotation just because you're trying to keep guys healthy. You're kind of trying to keep fresh legs out there. And there's all sorts of different variables and that goes into those second half stats. Whenever you're leading by 20, some stats look more skewed than others, and running the ball for the opposing team is one of those.
Yeah, and it doesn't even look skewed. They're still a top 20 team
Right.
against the rush this year,
which is oddly enough,
undisputedly.
yeah.
Just last year, I think spoiled everyone a little bit when you have two of the best defensive tackles in the country, if not the two best defensive tackles in the country, both playing for your team at the same time. But my question for you
Mhm.
is, do you think this is the game where maybe the defense not necessarily has a bad game, but maybe gives up a couple big touchdowns? Where they have to make some adjustments either in the game or coming out of the game going into the next week.
I don't. I'm completely sold on this defense at this point in the season.
And see, I've been the one who's been sold all season, but yeah, I think this might be a game where not necessarily they get a bunch of points, but maybe they score 24 points. I could see this being like a 37-24 type game for Texas. That's not my prediction. You'll see that later this week, but I could see it being a game where Arkansas, especially in the first half, hits like a 70 or 60-yard touchdown, gets a bunch of momentum. It gets a little scary early, and then Texas pulls away come like the third quarter.
I think this secondary has played the most football of anybody on the team, whether that be a Michael Taft, whether that be a Andrew Makuba, whether that be Jahdae Barron, whether that be Malik Muhammad. These guys have played a lot of football together, and they've played. I mean, they've just played. They're a veteran-led group, so I don't think they're going to get a whole lot of looks that they haven't already seen. Their communication on the back line is better than it is on the defensive line or on the offensive line. At any position group, the secondary has the best communication. There's been a lack of, just lapses in the defense and just lost receivers and blown coverages down the field. You just haven't seen it this year. It just hasn't happened. And that's because these guys communicate so well on the back end right there. So I don't see that happening. That's why they're the number one defense and not allowing big plays, is because of that communication and their experience. They've seen it all.
And I'll have to pull these stats for later in the week, but I imagine Texas has to be pretty high in the country with pressures too. And that's something we talked about in the preseason was, with a better secondary, gives your pass rushers a little more time. When your pass rushers are getting to the quarterback, it helps your secondary. And we saw that in the Florida game where you get pressures, you get tip balls, you get turnovers. And that's why we've seen the turnovers increase so much this year, is because the pass rush and the secondary are just working together perfectly.
They're complementing each other very well. That's something Sark's mentioned in Monday's press conference, is that the team was complementary football. They were playing very well together, whether that be coverage, allowing the defensive line to get pressure on the quarterback, or vice versa, what have you. One thing that I have noticed this season, Jake, and it's not a large sample size, so it's hard to tell whether or not it's a real issue or not. It's a lot of these things. Vanderbilt probably stands out most to me more than anything. But again, there's an asterisk there with penalties and taking away plays on actual stops and whatnot. And then the offense not executing. In Mississippi State, it was more so garbage time. It wasn't too big of a concern. It was strange because you had a backup quarterback, and so things were just felt a little off in the first place. Mobile quarterbacks. Taylor Green is a quarterback that we've seen have given the defense a little bit of an issue. Diego Pavia had a great second half. He made some plays with his legs, extending the play. We saw a little bit of it with Mississippi State's quarterback. The name escapes me right now, but does Taylor Green, his ability to extend the play, being a mobile quarterback, does that give you a little bit more hesitance on what this defense can do or what he can provide for Arkansas's offense as a counter to the defense?
No. And here's the reason why is Michael Van
I'm trying to
Buren.
poke holes in whatever.
I get it.
Yeah,
And maybe I eat my words here, but I didn't feel like Pavia. I mean, Pavia is their leading rusher at Vanderbilt. He is a big time run threat, and he did have he had 16 carries for 67 yards. But a lot of that was on that first drive, that 18-yard touchdown run. That's nearly a third of that yardage came on that first drive. After that, he was shut down. And the big reason why is these edges. Colin Simmons has been way better in space than I would have ever expected him to be as a freshman. We've even seen him go in coverage and do a good job at times. Not very much, but it's happened here or there. Trey Moore, I think, is probably the best on the roster at doing that. Baron Sorrell, Ethan Burr. I mean, you just have so many guys, and stopping the QB run is all about your edges. The defensive tackles to a point at pushing the pocket, not allowing him to step up, keeping their integrity as far as rushing gaps go. But your edges, the ability to not only rush the passer when the situation arises, but to contain. And I think Texas is really good at that this year. And it's why I like their chances at stopping Arkansas when it comes to the quarterback run game. I think if Arkansas creates explosives, it'll be in the passing game. I will say that now. My prediction of them getting a couple big plays, I think that's in the passing game. I think we see the secondary give up a couple big plays. I just don't see it happening from the quarterback rushing game. And maybe I'll eat my words on that, but I don't think any team has had a bunch of success doing that. I think Vanderbilt scheme-wise is really good, and that's still all came in that first drive, basically, or at least a good percentage of it did. And then that's why I like their chances going into College Station to look ahead. You know, if a Marcel Reed is the starting quarterback, I love that matchup for this defense.
Well, Jake, that is Texas, Arkansas by the numbers. Everybody, that is how we feel the game is going to go, at least statistically, and where these two teams measure up. We're going to break it down even further in tomorrow's episode, and we will give you the keys to victory for Texas, and we will break down more to come as the week continues. But leave your comment. Let us know how you feel, if there's any concerns that you've seen in Arkansas, whether that be Taylor Green's ability to run or whether that be the explosive play. Maybe you've seen something with the Texas defense that we're not seeing, and maybe it's a little bit of a concern for you. Let us know in the comments. We'd love to talk about it in later episodes this week leading up to the game. Well, that is going to do it. Again, we drop these episodes Tuesday through Friday at noon. I'm Tanner Carlson. That's Jake Jimerson. This is your daily fix for all things Texas Longhorns right here on All in Horns, brought to you by Rogue Sports Network. And as always, ladies and gentlemen, hook 'em.
All in Sports Network. We love sports.